Pokémon Emerald, more than any other game, is responsible for setting me on the path of a lifelong gamer. I had some experience with educational computer games beforehand, but this was just a passing fascination. Despite my preschool teacher's feedback that I needed to learn how to share the classroom PC, it wasn't the sort of interest that could sustain a lifelong obsession. Pokémon, meanwhile, had already captured my imagination through the numerous tendrils of a multimedia empire. My parents' overprotective watch had kept the games out of reach, but the cards, toys, and TV show spread Pokémon fever to a young Austin nevertheless. It became inevitable that I would eventually break through to the core video games once I sat next to a boy named Alex on my elementary school bus route. We're still great friends today, but back then he was just a kid with a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Pokémon Ruby. I'd watch over his shoulder, utterly transfixed by the world of possibilities that unfolded each day, longing for the opportunity to step into this world myself. The prospect of forming my own team of loyal creatures and setting out on my own adventure, equally exciting to Ash's escapades, was all my little mind could think about. After months of pleading, my parents eventually relented, and gifted my sister and I a pair of GBA SPs, with a few bargain bin games to get us started. The promise was made that we could each get a copy of Pokémon, or Pokemans as my dad called it, for our summer birthdays if we were on our best behavior in the months to come. I guess we upheld our end of the bargain because, before long, we made a trip to our local Best Buy and left with a Pokémon game for my sister, and nothing for a poor, teary-eyed Austin. You see, I had been obsessively researching on our family PC as I awaited this fateful day, and was resolute in playing the hot new game, Pokémon Emerald, which was out of stock at the time, while my sister was less picky and happily snagged Fire Red version. I'd never been more jealous as my sister picked her starter, a Squirtle very creatively nicknamed Splash, and began her journey as I, yet again, watched from the sidelines. It was only a matter of days until all was made right in my world, but it felt like an eternity. My patience was well rewarded though. The hundreds of hours I spent in Pokémon Emerald as a kid mark some of my fondest childhood memories. It was an experience unlike any I've gotten in subsequent games. In fact, I'm here today to assert that Pokémon Emerald is the absolute peak of the series. I know how this sounds. It's no surprise that the first game I played, at that perfect impressionable age no less, just so happens to be my pick for the pinnacle of Pokémon. It is my hope that this retrospective manages to convince you that this isn't mere nostalgia speaking, but that the third generation represents the franchise at its absolute best. Over the next hour or so, we'll dig deep into the third generation of Pokémon, composed of Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and endeavor to pin down just what makes them so special. Particular emphasis will be placed on Emerald, as the director's cut that successfully elevated great games into one that is truly legendary. The ancillary Pokémon games released during this era, including the remakes of Generation 1 and home console titles Pokémon Colosseum and its sequel XD Gale of Darkness, as well as countless other spin-offs, may come up in passing but are not the focus today. There isn't a great way to refer to the three Hoenn titles without just grouping them together as Gen 3, but I acknowledge the video title may be misleading for those that use a broader definition of the third generation. My apologies. As you might expect, this is the third entry in an ongoing Pokémon Retrospective series here on YouTube. I promise to keep this video rolling even if you haven't caught up on those previous entries, but you have to agree to bring with you a baseline level of familiarity with Pokémon. I don't have the time nor the patience to recap basic series staples. With all the red tape out of the way, join me please as we dive into the world of Hoenn. Pokémon games have never been celebrated for their storytelling, but I still think it prudent to briefly set the scene for our adventure. The player character in these titles is more explicitly integrated into the game world than their predecessors were. This journey begins within a moving truck as our family immigrates from Johto to Hoenn. In a series first, our father is not only present, but has actually been appointed as the Petalburg City gym leader, hence the move. Norman, wow, he's even given a name, plays a major role as an early motivator and benchmark for the player to measure themselves against. What child doesn't dream of proving themselves to their parents? These details are never overbearing, and crucially never undermine the strengths of a blank slate avatar. Young players will find it as effortless as ever to project themselves into the story. I have other issues with Gen 3's broader narrative that I'll get to later, but I appreciate the balance this extra context strikes. Littleroot Town will feel familiar to those who've already paid Pallet and Newbark a visit. Coincidentally, the smallest towns are always home to the regional Pokemon expert. Professor Birch predictably presents players with a choice of 3 starter Pokemon, but this creative framing with a newfound urgency helps freshen up an otherwise formulaic plot beat. The absurdity of the leading Pokemon professor being held up by a Zigzagoon of all things is good for a laugh, and the inherent heroics behind this encounter smoothly segue into the decision to venture beyond the safety of our hometown. As for the starters themselves, this isn't much of a contest in my book. Mudkip is the clear winner. He's bursting with charm thanks to a fantastic visual design that completely eclipses his competitors. On paper, Mudkip is based on the real-world Mudskipper family, but this is easily missed by even that young animal enthusiast who checked out the same eyewitness wildlife books from the library week after week. I speak from personal experience. To me, Mudkip was just a funny little creature, with adorably oversized gills, tail, and head fin, quirky features that somehow remained very cohesive. The bold blue-orange color contrast seals the deal. Trico was perhaps unfairly neglected by young Austin, as I was especially fond of reptiles, but it was impossible for him to escape Mudkip's shadow. Torchic brings up the rear, and there really isn't much to say here. It's kind of cute, I suppose, but this overly plain chick is the first starter that completely fails to captivate me. Of course, I have my preferences within the Kanto and Johto trios, but in each case I find the entire set to be immediately appealing. It's a shame this streak has ended. I can't in good faith say the same about the Hoenn trio. At the risk of jumping too far ahead, I'll continue the comparison with their evolutions. Grovyle marks a definite glow up from Trico, packing a satisfyingly sleek form and the incorporation of more grassy elements that grant him more of an identity. Sceptile is another natural evolution. You can still see hints of that aloof gecko, but he now evokes the speed and ferocity of a velociraptor. This was actually my sister's partner when she eventually joined me with her own copy of Emerald. That basic Blastoise named Splash was retroactively vindicated once paired with her Sceptile, Slash. Torchic gains a secondary type when it evolves into Combuskin, the fighting cock. Actually, maybe the less said about Combuskin the better. Let's get this guy off screen before I get demonetized. Blaziken is the clear highlight of his evolutionary line, but does exceed my personal threshold for uncanny, human-like bipedal Pokemon. No disrespect to his many fans, it's an objectively strong design, but he makes me more than a little uncomfortable if I'm being completely honest. I wish I could say Mudkip's evolutionary path was as smooth and natural as Trico's, but it suffers an unfortunate stumble with a profoundly awkward teenage phase. Mudkip's features are still recognizable in Marshtomp, but the proportions and bipedal stance, not to mention those dead eyes, throw the whole thing off. Still, I'll gladly take Marshtomp over Combuskin any day of the week. Swampert rights almost all of Marshtomp's wrongs. Those freaky eyes stubbornly persist. I do miss Mudkip's overwhelming cuteness, but I can't complain about where Swampert ends up. He was my pick as a child and remains my pick today, but much credit is owed to Mudkip's immaculate first impression. Of course, it doesn't hurt that Swampert is by far the strongest pick in-game, with stats in all the right places and a fantastic water-ground typing. With water's usual electric weakness nullified by ground's immunity, Swampert is vulnerable to grass alone, albeit in the form of a 4x weakness. This is just about a non-issue though. There's a complete absence of any grass-type specialist of note in all of Hoenn. Selecting Mudkip is honestly tantamount to playing the game on easy mode. I definitely used him as a crutch in my initial childhood playthrough. You wouldn't believe how easily an over-leveled Swampert could solo the entire game. As we set out into Greater Hoenn with Starter in tow, we're joined by Professor Birch's daughter, or son as the case may be. In these games, the traditional rival role is filled by the opposite gender player avatar. I selected the male protagonist, so Birch has a daughter, May. If I had instead chosen the admittedly more stylish female option, then the boy with the goofy hat that I'm controlling now would be repurposed as Birch's son, Brendan. Don't lie, you used to think it was white hair too, didn't you? The fact that these characters can be swapped out without any impact to the narrative perfectly illustrates how hollow their characterization is. Blue and Silver from the previous games fit simple bully archetypes, but they filled that role exceedingly well. All players invariably love to hate them. The competitive drive these two inspired was a far stronger motivator than Brendan or May's friendly encouragement. Eventually, the game itself even gives up on positioning Birch's child as anything other than a cheerleader for the player's exploits. Our final face-off with them takes place before the 7th gym and ends with this supposed rival simply deciding to give up and go home. For context, their party at this point doesn't even feature a fully evolved starter. As grass types were the only threat to my Swampert, I won't complain too much, but it is a very strange decision. Thankfully, Wally is here to pick up the slack. After his introduction in this game's catching tutorial, we check in with Wally's parallel journey several times throughout the game, but it is always positioned as a student-teacher relationship. That is, until a surprise bait and switch in Victory Road, where you clash with him as equals for the first time. The storytelling and payoff behind this battle is excellent. That first Ralts you helped him catch in Petalburg now threatens to sweep your team as his formidable ace Gardevoir. I commend the clever subversion of the rival trope, but I wish it didn't come at the expense of a proper, truly compelling rival. Before we get too far, I'd like to introduce you to my team. The 6 that I befriended this time are all among my favorite Pokemon introduced in these games. I'll have more to say about the full roster of newcomers later on, but for now let's just focus on these MVPs. You've already met my Swampert, the undisputed anchor of the team, so let's start there. Surf and Earthquake were no-brainers. Both are excellent moves in isolation, made even better with the 1.5x same type attack bonus. Blizzard is admittedly unreliable, but the ice coverage often came in clutch and even offered me a surprise counter to those pesky grass types that might try to swap in. Finally, Protect is simply a great utility move. It allowed me to scout out danger and get some passive HP regen when coupled with the Leftovers held item, a very powerful effect for this bulky boy. Speaking of grass types, I've got one of my own. I caught a Shroomish just after the first gym, evolved him at level 23, and took him all the way to the mid-game before realizing that my plans were a little faulty. You see, Breloom never actually learns Spore. Only an unevolved Shroomish at level 54 gets the privilege of a 100% accurate sleep. Not one to succumb to the sunk cost fallacy, I actually opted to hatch Junior here and start fresh. Was the payoff worth this huge investment, dragging an underperformer all the way to the Elite Four? Probably not, but it was a memorable experience all the same. Giga Drain and Leech Seed could be used to lifesteal off the sleeping opponent, but I typically opted for the more aggressive approach. Focus Punch hits ridiculously hard, but will fail if the opponent lands an attack during the charge-up, hence the sleep strat. With Breloom's sky-high attack stat, a fighting subtype, and Focus Punch's 150 base power, the unlucky recipient doesn't typically wake up. That's water and grass checked off the list, so of course we need fire to complete the set. Torkoal picked up Junior's slack in the mid-game. As a single-stage Pokemon, he packed healthy immediate value. His moveset required a few late-game TMs and move tutors to fully develop, but I really liked the kamikaze role he eventually slotted into. Overheat has a whopping 140 base power, but like Focus Punch comes with a steep downside. The user's special attack drops 2 stages after each use, meaning a second overheat would only do half the damage of the first. To get around that, Torkoal can finish off the opponent with physical moves like Strength or Rock Slide, and then sacrifice his remaining HP with Explosion, hopefully earning a one-hit KO in the process. I don't expect Torkoal to sweep. If he can manage this 2-for-1 trade, that's a job well done in my book. I should note that something like Strength is a bit suboptimal compared to Return, or who am I kidding, Frustration. I like trying to find natural slots for HM moves in my Pokemon's movesets. It's a fun team-building challenge and streamlines exploration. That being said, I don't force the weak early HMs like Cut, Rock Smash, or Flash. I just kept those handy until it made sense to forget them for something better. As you might guess by the name, Flygon was my flyer. What I've always loved about this line is the drastic transformation it undergoes. From the stubby desert-dwelling Trapinch to this sleek dragon you can ride into the clouds. Their real-world counterpart, the Antlion, actually undergoes a similarly surprising metamorphosis, but obviously not one that culminates in a dragon. It bugs me that this family isn't part bug type, but each time Flygon shrugs off an electric move and retaliates with a stab earthquake, I'm reminded that the ground subtype is for the best. The dragon half is the real reason I'm picking Flygon anyway. Training him was a special experience, as dragons are typically inaccessible for an in-game team. With mostly balanced stats across the board, I didn't specialize Flygon too much, just packed him with good coverage moves for a mixed attacker. Milotic is my next Pokemon. Generation 3 features 3 Water-type HMs yet again, so doubling up on water was warranted. The elegant Milotic is a clear thematic parallel to Gyarados, with its own homely pre-evolution in Feebas. Through dedicated training, even a useless fish can grow into a powerful sea serpent. In Gyarados' case, this simply meant training a Magikarp up to level 20. Easy peasy. Not so with Milotic. Game Freak cooked up some frankly insane requirements that solidified Milotic as one of the most elusive Pokemon ever. Just finding a Feebas is something of a feat. Magikarp could be caught in literally every body of water with the most basic fishing rod. Feebas, on the other hand, is exclusive to one river that snakes through Route 119, and can only be hooked on a grand total of 6 randomized tiles of the 400 plus total. It's almost impossible to encounter Feebas naturally. Even prepared players should expect the hunt to take upwards of an hour. Now for the bombshell. Evolving it is even more arduous. You could train a Feebas all the way to level 100, and he would still stubbornly refuse to evolve. Instead, you must partake in an elaborate berry growing minigame to craft beauty-enhancing Pokeblocks out of special dry berries. The best berries are quite rare, and can take several real-world days to grow. And let's not forget, there's always the chance your Feebas doesn't care for these Pokeblocks and fills up before its beauty maxes out. For modern players, this is a hefty time commitment, but it is doable. In 2005, without the help of online tutorials, forget about it. As with Junior, the extreme lengths I went to add Milotic to my team just made her that much more special to me. Her ability to stall out tricky opponents is undeniably toxic, but was a reliable get-out-of-jail-free card when more honorable strategies failed. Rounding out my team is a childhood favorite, Dusclops. This ghost perfectly marries its mummy and Cyclops inspirations, and I've always found myself drawn to its imposing aura. I mainly use my Dusclops as a disruptor, spreading status conditions to cripple the opposition so the rest of the team can do their job. However, this Dusclops always has an ace up her sleeve. If the situation presents itself, she is fully capable of setting up for a sweep herself. With natural bulk and the help of a lucky confusion coin flip or two, Dusclops can easily squeeze a few calm minds in on an unsuspecting foe. After Will-O-Wisp halves the opponent's physical attack, it's going to be pretty tough to break through a 130 base physical defense. With Calm Mind boosting an equally impressive special defense, special attackers quickly become equally ineffective. Dusclops' paltry 60 base special attack might not look frightening at first, but once the pieces are in position, it is very possible to hit 6 Calm Minds and reach an effective special attack of 240. That's gonna hurt. The ability to pivot like this made Dusclops a very versatile member of the team, not to mention an unexpected win condition in many of the game's toughest fights. This team saw me through forests, cities, volcanoes, deserts, and yes, a substantial amount of water too. The variety of environments within Hoenn make it a true joy to explore. Each town and city feels distinct, not only through narrative or mechanical function, but in size, layout, architecture, and culture. This was partially true of previous games as well, but Hoenn really raises the bar here. With the exception of the small way stations that mostly act as Pokemon-centered checkpoints, every town has something to call its own. Rustboro is a hub of industry and progress, led by the preeminent Devon Corporation. Mauville sits at the mainland's crossroads and caters to travelers of all sorts. The verdant turf is a literal breath of fresh air from these larger cities. Wally moves here from Petalburg and hopes that he can heal from a chronic illness. Slateport, famous for its open-air market, is a bustling harbor and trade port. Lily Cove, a seaside metropolis, is a hugely popular vacation destination, with tourist attractions such as the Contest Hall, a sprawling shopping mall, museum, motel, and pristine beaches. My favorites are the settlements that blur the line between civilization and wilderness. These unique towns have achieved true harmony with nature, a defining theme for Hoenn as a whole. Lava Ridge Town channels Mount Chimney's geothermal energy to create a soothing retirement home for its geriatric population. Pacific Log Town drifts peacefully atop the ocean, with inhabitants content to live out their lives never setting foot on land. Fortree in particular realizes a childhood dream of mine, a whole network of connected treehouses. I'd move there in a heartbeat. A shocking degree of care was also paid to the routes connecting these towns. The game would be perfectly functional if these routes were all nondescript corridors. Their aesthetics don't make or break Pokemon's success. Regardless, the designers went the extra mile in including countless small details, often completely superfluous ones, that collectively bring Hoenn to life. Take Route 104, which bookends Petalburg Woods. Footsteps linger in the sand, reflections ripple in the water, and you can practically feel the gentle breeze. This bespoke visual effect never appears anywhere else in Hoenn. It is entirely exclusive to little old Route 104. Possessing zero gameplay significance, it's just a lovely little treat from a devoted designer that cared enough to go above and beyond. This attitude is exemplified in the famous example of Route 113. A cloud of ash drifts down from the nearby Mount Chimney and coats the grass in gray. As the player disrupts this blanket of soot, the green grass underneath is revealed. I fondly remember going full Zen mode and meticulously cleaning the whole area over and over again. It's special because it's so unnecessary. It's a distinctly human creative inclusion. Route 110 presents players with a choice, a fork between a bike path and a pedestrian path. Players like me won't be able to resist backtracking to hit both paths, but this too is a unique feature to the route. 119, the infamous Feebas route, sports extra long grass for trainers to hide in, a persistent storm, and a complex layered layout crisscrossing over the river. There are even thoughtful quality of life inclusions to make players' lives easier. It's no coincidence that Route 117 contains a lengthy uninterrupted path to farm steps right in front of the daycare. This kind of stuff is just good level design that reaches far beyond the call of duty. If one route really speaks to you, why not set up camp and stake your claim? The new secret base feature empowers players with an amazing avenue for self-expression. There are 75 possible base locations, each with their own varied layout and an extensive collection of interior decoration options. With so many possibilities, it's impossible to imagine two players ever settling on the same secret base. After a multiplayer session, your friend's base will appear in your game, and vice versa. A snapshot of your current team will even be preserved through an NPC battle within. This is such a smart inclusion because it doubles down upon one of the core appeals to Pokemon, that being player expression. What other role-playing game presents its players with several hundred distinct team-building options, and gives them the freedom to mix and match with complete impunity before showing off to their friends? I suspect the freedom of choice and the accompanying social element is a major reason the series exploded in the first place. This appeal is surprisingly rare in video games, considering how universal it is to the childhood experience. Think about how important it is for a kid to choose their own bedroom wallpaper, or hang up a poster that represents their passions. Game Freak capturing this within the game was a stroke of genius. Secret bases may seem like an inconsequential, easily ignored side feature, but the sense of ownership they bring really makes Hoenn feel like home. It's incredible just how much life was packed into this virtual world, tiny enough to hold in the palm of your hands. Of course, we owe our thanks to the skilled designers for imbuing Hoenn with its characteristic charm, but much credit goes to the Game Boy Advance as well. By the time Pokemon Red and Blue launched in the West, the original Game Boy was already nearly a decade old. Gold and Silver gained color on the You guessed it, Game Boy Color, but these games were still shackled to antiquated tech. As the first Pokemon games to release on a modern cutting-edge handheld, Ruby and Sapphire deliver the first true generational graphical leap of the series. Combine this raw horsepower with a more confident than ever design team firing on all cylinders, and you've got a winning formula. Their unleashed creativity takes full advantage of the GBA's capabilities, and in some ways even exceeds them. The launch GBA's dim screen muted Hoenn's lush colors, criminally obscuring the vibrancy of the art. It's only with the addition of a backlight on the SP revision, or whatever modern display you're viewing this video on now, that the game's true beauty can be fully appreciated. As iconic as those trumpets are, the music too is held back by the hardware's crunchy sound. Even when emulated, these tracks are muddied by the lack of a dedicated sound chip. It's all handled by the main CPU. Still, the compositions themselves are so strong that they manage to shine through, pairing with the gorgeous visuals to elevate what had once been a basic play experience into one that's a feast for the senses. The fictional land of Hoenn takes loose inspiration from the Kyushu region of real-world Japan. The map may be rotated 90 degrees, but the general shape is recognizable. Famous Kyushu landmarks like Mount Aso, one of the largest active volcanoes in the world, find substitutes such as Mount Chimney. Like Kyushu, Hoenn too is dominated by small scattered islands off the coast of the mainland. This brings us to the million-dollar question: does Hoenn have too much water? There's more nuance to this meme than people let on, although some seem to actually believe the criticism is that literal. Who's to say what constitutes too much water anyway? I personally believe much of Generation 3's idiosyncratic personality is a result of its distinct ocean-heavy ecology. Don't you think each Pokemon region ought to have something to set it apart? I'd rather remember Hoenn as the water one, for better or for worse, than begin and end the conversation with, Hoenn has a perfectly balanced biome diversity in line with every other Pokemon game. A better question would be, how successfully do these games implement such copious water routes? And to that I do have gripes. For one, the water routes needed better distribution throughout the campaign. As is, with them all crammed into the last third, the game's pacing suffers severely. Water routes are similar to caves in that all tiles are subject to random encounters. Of course, the player is free to stock up on repels for this entire chunk of the game, but we've got to admit something went wrong at a design level if the intended approach is to circumvent the core gameplay itself. I'm willing to bet the average player is too irrationally stingy with consumables to commit to this approach regardless. Instead, most players will just grit their teeth, doing their best to trudge along despite incessant interruptions. The resulting frustration is exacerbated by the inexplicably poor encounter variety on these late-game water routes. From Lily Cove City to the end of the game, there are 11 water routes to explore. Take a wild guess at how many different Pokemon can be found while surfing across this entire Eastern Ocean. Go ahead, lock in your answer. Alright, it's gotta be at least a dozen, don't you think? Let's count them and see. We begin with Route 124, and the exciting lineup of Tentacool, Wingull, and Pelipper. Not a great start. It's a stretch to consider Pelipper a separate encounter, and both of these families are early game fodder that have long since grown stale. On Route 125, we will once again be bombarded with Tentacool, Wingull, and Pelipper. Route 126 is home to, you guessed it, Tentacool, Wingull, and Pelipper. Starting to get the picture? Forgive me for skipping ahead, but every single route from 124 to 134 has an identical encounter pool of Tentacool, Wingull, and Pelipper, with the exact same distribution of 60, 35, and 5% respectively. For all you commenters out there, I admit there is one tiny exception on Route 129, but it's more of a technicality than anything. A 1% chance at a Wailord does exceedingly little to break up this unimaginable monotony. The nerds that guessed 4 unique surf encounters are correct on paper, however in practice, Pelipper and Wailord can safely be ignored, leaving naught but Tentacool and Wingull for 11 straight routes. I'd be remiss not to remind you that these could both be added to the player's team way back in Route 103. The Hoenn Pokedex is overflowing with water-type options, but the bulk are reserved for deep-sea grass and fishing, methods that leave finding wild Pokemon entirely to the player's discretion. That is to say, they absolutely will be ignored in the midst of an unending onslaught of surf encounters. The developers seem to treat the entire Eastern Ocean as one gargantuan route, which flies in the face of their apparent goal to spice up the interstitial areas between cities. My previous retrospective on this channel was focused on The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Perhaps you watched it. That game, as great as it is, committed a similar sin by padding out the endgame with filler content in the ocean. In Wind Waker's case, the original vision was clearly compromised to meet aggressive deadlines. I'd like to think that Game Freak 2 had bigger plans for this seafaring chapter. The hints of greatness that were implemented in the ocean make this lost potential all the more disappointing. I really like the maze-like rock formations that appear. Their interaction with the awesome new deep-sea diving mechanic creates some of the most complex level designs in Pokémon. This interplay calls to mind the classic 2D Zelda navigation puzzles across a mirror world. I'm a big Zelda fan if you couldn't tell. The more open nature of the ocean really encourages player-directed exploration, if you supply your own repels, that is. There are exciting discoveries to be made for sure, but it's just spread too thin. The issue isn't too much water, it's too little meaningful content within all that water. On the flip side, everything leading up to Lily Cove flows marvelously, with the player organically guided from gym to gym at a brisk pace, never lingering enough for any one activity or setting to overstay its welcome. Crucially, it never feels as though you're simply going through the motions of checking off gym badges. The main path through Hoenn is impeccably designed to feel like you're charting your own adventure, even as the game subtly steers you along a set path. This invisible hand-holding is something I never fully appreciated as a kid, but I now consider it a major strength of the early Pokémon games. Roadblocks, typically HM moves, gently nudge players in the dev-desired direction while gradually opening up the map on pace with the player's growing strength. Not all roadblocks are equally elegant, but they serve this core purpose effectively. At a bird's eye view, let's briefly recap that intended progression route. From Littleroot we head north to Oldale, then onward to Petalburg, and eventually Rustboro. The inability to surf locks all players into this initial sequence, with no option to venture east from Oldale. The Rusturf Tunnel is still under construction, so progress to the east after Rustboro is once again foiled. By chance, Devon CEO Mr. Stone requires some errands run in Dewford and Slateport. The ever-grateful Mr. Briney offers to ferry us over as a thank you for rescuing his precious Pico. From Slateport, it's a simple trek north to Mauville, at which point we earn HM Rock Smash to clear out a handy shortcut in Rusturf Tunnel. The entire eastern half of Hoenn remains off limits, so the only option is to progress further north. After an encounter with Team Aqua and Magma in Meteor Falls just past Fall Arbor, the cable car that will take us to Lava Ridge is opened. By this point we've got 4 gym badges under our belt, and Daddy Norman finally accepts our challenge way back in Petalburg. A hard-fought victory grants us the invaluable ability to surf at long last. This is a major turning point in Generation 3's structure. The opening of the map brings with it great potential for non-linear exploration. You could venture east to progress the story, but you could also backtrack to any of the water routes that eluded us earlier. Remember that intriguing blink-and-you'll-miss-it glimpse of an abandoned shipwreck during Mr. Briney's ferry ride? Or what about a visit to the new Mauville power plant to add some electricity to your team? The game has previously reveled in teasing players with inaccessible paths and items, but armed with HM's Cut, Flash, Rock Smash, Strength, and now Surf, just about the entire western half of Hoenn is now at our fingertips. These detours feel just as lovingly designed as the mainline content. Players who skip them are absolutely missing out on the full Hoenn experience. Once you are ready to push forward, one-way ledges force you north to Fortree, then Lily Cove, and ultimately the Great Sea of Hoenn. From there, you are only required to visit Moss Deep in Sootopolis before facing the Elite Four at Evergrande, but the Golden Path is admittedly fuzzier here in the endgame. This winding tour of Hoenn keeps you guessing constantly, creates intuitive shortcuts, and empowers intrepid players to explore to their heart's content. What more could you want? Hoenn's vastness never ceases to impress me. Its scale is staggering, not just in the sheer sprawl of land and sea, but also in the hidden depth tucked just out of sight. An NPC in Pacific, itself an entirely optional town, references an elusive Mirage Island. For players of the day, this was little more than an intriguing folktale. That is, until one classmate excitedly claims he actually stepped foot on the mythical island. With full knowledge of its mechanics and ultimately underwhelming rewards, this mystery admittedly loses much of its luster to modern internet-age players. But at the time, secrets like this were extremely successful in igniting players' imaginations. While riding the rapids of Route 134, the fortunate few may find themselves swept to this unassuming diving spot, ground zero for a truly legendary treasure hunt. Inside the sealed chamber, cryptic tablets convey a hidden message to those clever enough to decipher them, with the preceding Rosetta Stone alphabet. Adults will immediately recognize these otherworldly carvings as real-world Braille, but try to put yourself in the shoes of a naive youngster when presented with this puzzle. The inscriptions read, "In this cave we have lived. We owe all to the Pokémon, but we sealed the Pokémon away. We feared it. Those with courage, those with hope, open a door. An eternal Pokémon waits." This doesn't quite reach the level of Mewtwo's buildup in the Pokémon Mansion, but I love the use of tantalizing lore to raise anticipation and ground legendaries within the world of Pokémon. Much earlier, players would have passed by a series of suspicious rock formations during their travels. By following a series of clues to the letter, players can finally open these tombs and face off with the ancient golems within. The 3 Reggies are indicative of a bloated legendary roster, but their encounter method is simply masterful. Game Freak subverts those ridiculous playground rumors, Mew under the truck and the like, by making these steps so nonsensical as to become unbelievable. Hunting down the Reggies made me feel like Indiana Jones, solving bizarre ancient puzzles to uncover hidden wonders buried to time. The fact that these sealed chambers and Mirage Island are actually real only fueled the fire for rumors and theories surrounding Hoenn's other oddities. Surely I wasn't alone in my conviction that there existed a certain sequence of steps that would allow me to ride the rocket ship from Moss Deep into outer space. It was only logical that this is how you encounter the new extraterrestrial mythical Deoxys. Except that wasn't actually the case, at least until the 3DS remakes. The Space Center is just there. Scorched Slab, a tiny featureless cave in Route 120's lake, honestly has no greater purpose than housing the Sunny Day TM. Nevertheless, it's just so random that it's impossible to get over the feeling that there must be more to it. Is this bad game design? Maybe, but I love how that sense of mystery and discovery is preserved, even in the shadow of Bulbapedia. Our primary goal, the motivation for this whole adventure, remains the very traditional gym challenge in pursuit of the champion title. Gold, Silver, and Crystal suffered from largely forgettable gym leaders. Generation 3 fares better, but still fails to stand toe-to-toe with the original Kanto lineup. I don't necessarily hold this against the games, as I imagine it's much more difficult to come up with distinct human designs than Pokemon designs. Furthermore, the writers were only given a few lines of dialogue to create a character out of a pixelated sprite, one that must somehow stand out from the 16 previous gym leaders. With that in mind, let's run through them one by one. I promise to keep it brief. We begin on a bit of a sour note, Roxanne and her rock types. To be fair, the school teacher concept is actually pretty fresh, and her flashy red tights give an otherwise plain design enough pizzazz to stand out. I do wish she evoked the rock type better in her appearance, but Roxanne's design isn't the problem. My issue lies with the decision to open the region with a rock type gym yet again. It's a very boring choice, yet seemingly an intentional one. Her team is a near copy and paste of Brock's, with Onyx swapped out for the decidedly less cool Nosepass. At least players who picked a fire-type starter aren't punished as severely this time. Plenty of grass and water options like Lotad, Seedot, or Wingull are freely available by the time you arrive in Rustboro. And hey, if you're stubborn, Combusken's double kick does the trick just fine. Brawly is fought almost immediately after Roxanne, but presents a much steeper challenge with a stat-boosted Makahita. He doesn't really give me much to work with otherwise, but I do like how he is fought early. That, combined with his surfer personality, keeps Brawly from feeling like just another entry in a long line of mid to late game fighting type specialists. HM Flash, unlocked by conquering the second gym, is helpful but never actually required. This means players can skip Brawly and return later if they so choose. Such non-linear options were a big part of the first generation, but have been gradually phased out as the series matured. I'm not entirely sure how intentional this was in Generation 3, but regardless, it's neat that this tradition continued with the 2nd and 6th gyms. I have a soft spot for Watson's character, but man, his Ruby Sapphire team is absolutely tragic. Exclusively Kanto Pokemon, and probably the most common electric types at that. Oof. I was willing to chalk another electric gym being placed 3rd up to a coincidence, but now I'm not feeling so generous. One of Emerald's many improvements over the base games is in revamping the leaders' teams, something Watson was in desperate need of. His new ace Manectric doesn't magically solve his glaring ground vulnerability, but at least it's a fresh face without a quad weakness to such a common type. Mudkip or any ground alternative trivialize this fight, but Watson can be quite difficult if you lack that pivotal counter. Flannery too has a great design. Despite her fiery personality, she's anything but a Blaine retread. I love to see Slugma get a spotlight here. It's a Pokemon I'm quite fond of that never got a chance to shine in the Johto games. That being said, I could have done without the duplicate. Gym leaders packing multiple of the same species on their team is just inexcusable in my eyes. The Emerald team is once again a marked improvement with the addition of the Camerupt line. It's tempting to criticize Norman's incredibly bland look, but I think that's kind of the point. He's a normal type trainer after all, and as the protagonist's father, a certain down-to-earth look is called for. Regardless, Norman's real strength is in his fantastic team, especially after Emerald's revisions. 4 unique Pokemon, each running 4 unique strategies. Vigoroth is a reliable all-arounder, Spinda runs support for the team, and Linoone keeps players on their toes with the threat of a belly drum sweep. Once those 3 are disposed of, players better be prepared for Big Boss Slacking, likely the toughest challenge thus far. Generation 3 introduced Pokemon abilities to the series, but thus far they've all been pretty innocuous. You'd be forgiven for not even noticing that Spinda is immune to confusion, or Vigoroth's Vital Spirit prevents it from falling asleep. On the other hand, Slacking's ability defines this fight. Truant forces him to skip every other turn entirely. That handicap starts to make a whole lot of sense once you look at his stat line. For context, Mewtwo has a base stat total of 680. Slacking has 670, and this is the 5th gym. Truant does open the door to cheesier strategies, but even then this is a fight like nothing before, and one you won't easily forget. For once, players are tasked with critical thinking beyond simple type advantage, and for that Norman deserves kudos. Next up is Winona, who marks a return to Earth with a more standard gym battle. Her flying team demonstrates very strong secondary type variety, though it comes at the cost of cohesion. This lineup feels as if it were assembled through a random lottery of flying candidates rather than any sort of theme. Her ace Altaria is the only serious threat amongst them anyway. If you let her set up a Dragon Dance or 2, she can very easily sweep your team with boosted attack and speed. This Altaria also runs the hard-hitting Earthquake, an effective means to scare off potential electric or rock threats. Ice coverage is almost mandatory here. A gym leader's visual design should evoke their type specialty and strive to stand out from the crowd, but I think they went too far with Winona. Her outfit is overly fantastical to the point of goofiness. Even the flying leader should remain a little grounded. As an aside, I do want to praise these small puzzles preceding the Hoenn gym battles. The Forgery Gym brain teaser is a highlight, so I figured this was as good an opportunity as I was going to get. These puzzles are only a tiny addition at the end of the day, but I really appreciate their inclusion. They remind me of something you'd find in the top-down Legend of Zelda dungeons. An expansion of this type of gameplay could be a great fit for Pokemon. After raving about Norman, you'd be forgiven for thinking his is my favorite gym in the game. You'd also be incorrect. That honor belongs to the absolute best battle in the entire game, a double battle against the psychic twins Tate and Liza. First, allow me to explain double battles in general. They're a brilliant twist on the traditional formula. 2 of your Pokemon face off against 2 opponents at once. We've advanced far beyond rock, paper, scissors at this point, Switching your Pokemon out and all the associated mind games become even more impactful in this new format. The complexity of battle is deepened exponentially. It's a simple numbers game, really. In standard singles, there are 2 primary options per turn: attack or return. Each of these decisions then branches off to a set of secondary decisions. There are 4 moves that could be used, and up to 5 other Pokemon that could swap in. Double battles not only duplicate those same 2 decision trees, but actually add a tertiary fork to the attacking one. Which opponent will be targeted? In some niche circumstances, targeting your partner is also a viable option. Doubles open the door to a host of new strategies and team archetypes. It's no surprise that double battles have become the standard PvP rule set. What is surprising is how poorly the Hoenn games showcase this depth. Emerald makes a commendable effort to incorporate more double battles into the story, but this is mostly through surface layer changes to NPC behavior and sightlines. The true potential of double battles lies far beyond speeding up rote trainer fights. Tate and Liza are the glorious exception, eager to demonstrate what is possible when a team is fully tailored to the format. In Ruby and Sapphire, the twins bring Lunatone and Solrock to fight as a pair. Facing these partnered counterparts just feels right, and their movesets have been carefully assembled for maximum coordination. On paper, this seems like a simple fight. 2 rock types in a double battle? Just spam Surf, a borderline OP move in any circumstance. Every player is guaranteed to have it by now, and it's even better in double battles. Both opponents share in the damage. It's all fun and games until Lunatone puts up Light Screen, boosting both of their special defenses, and Solrock uses Sunny Day, weakening Water's effectiveness across the board. Solrock's instant Solar Beam seems particularly positioned to neuter your Swampert Crutch, and a sun-boosted Flamethrower annihilates any wannabe grass counters. As Solrock rains down elemental bombs, you're forced into a defensive playstyle. Meanwhile, Lunatone is calmly minding its own business, boosting for a devastating psychic sweep. The decision paralysis is real. Which of these threats should you target first? Emerald ups the ante even further with the addition of Claydol and Xatu. It's obvious that much thought went into how these Pokemon function as a team rather than as individuals. None of that perfect synergy is diluted, it's only enhanced. Claydol's Earthquake is particularly dastardly. The move hits both of your Pokemon for the full 100 base power, with the drawback that the user's partner is also affected. Of course, all of Claydol's potential partners just so happen to be immune to ground moves, either through a flying subtype or the levitate ability, a clever way to entirely mitigate collateral damage. This is some next level team building that is almost completely exclusive to this gym battle alone. Ironically enough, the closest coordination comparison is just a random double battle in Victory Road. My jaw hit the floor when this Gardevoir used Skill Swap on its partner Slacking, effectively removing its Truant shackles and unleashing legendary tier strength upon my poor unsuspecting junior. After the GOATs Tate and Liza, Wallace's team of water Pokemon are frankly a bit underwhelming, but his team does fit together thematically at least. Luvdisc, Seaking, Whiscash, and his ace Milotic are all tied to their trainer through their shared elegance. Celio is a bit of a stretch in that respect, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. Wallace would be fairly forgettable if not for his role as the Cave of Origin's guardian. I'm a sucker for gym leaders that actually interact with the world outside the 4 walls of their gym. I fear I've already broken my promise of brevity, but did you really believe me given this video's length? If so, honestly that's on you. We're in so deep already I see no reason to not at least skim through the Elite Four. Sydney is a total pushover, but I love to see the variety of dark types under his command. Along with Ghost, Dragon, and Steel, Dark was an underutilized type in previous generations, but you can tell a concerted effort was made to add more representatives in the new Pokemon roster. Phoebe's team does use 3 of those new Ghost types, but unfortunately that's with 2 pairs of duplicates. The Dusclops twins and Banette twins are given different movesets, but that's not nearly enough to avoid a failing grade on the Austin Ashworth scale. Interesting character design for a Ghost-type specialist though. Glacia is even more inexcusable. Her 5 Pokemon team is pulled from a whopping 2 evolutionary families. This is due to the baffling reality that Hoenn is only home to 3 Ice-type families total, and Regice is understandably off limits. There are so many potential ice types from Kanto and Johto that could have been brought forward. I have to assume this was some sort of oversight in the Hoenn decks that then trickled down to Glacia. To be clear, Walrein is an innocent bystander in this affair. He's great and deserves a much better team. Drake is the top dog in the Elite Four. With the generous Gen 3 additions to the Dragon Pool, it's finally possible to give a Dragon Master a varied team, with nary a Dragonite in sight no less. I like his position in the Elite Four. Dragon is naturally a climactic type. Ironically, positioning Drake as the champion would have diminished his stature in my eyes. Lance casts a very wide shadow indeed. So, who is the champion then? Well, it's complicated. In Ruby and Sapphire, Steven Stone waits at the end of the Elite Four gauntlet. He's a familiar face by this point. Steven pops in and out of the story on numerous occasions and fills something of a mentor role for the protagonist. The modest man never outright introduces himself as champion, but the reveal comes as an organic culmination of our relationship. Steven favors steel Pokemon, however half his team lacks the type altogether. Perhaps these 3 rock types call back to his fascination with rare stones. This loose theming would be strange for a gym leader, but I appreciate it in a championship fight, and actually wish Steven had even greater diversity. If you ask me, Blue's eclectic team from Generation 1 forms an excellent template for what a champion should strive for. Steven's iconic Metagross is the clear highlight of his team, an absolute monster of a pseudo-legendary that's sure to catch players off guard. Drake's Salamence is awesome as well, but Dragonflying is familiar territory for seasoned players by now. Metagross's fantastic Steel Psychic typing is wholly new, and he packs a stat line any other Pokemon would envy. Because the Metagross line is exclusive to the champion, and because his post-game gift is the only way to get a Beldum of your own, this Pokemon's identity is completely inseparable from Steven in my mind. Even today, just as with Dragonite and Lance, I can't see a Metagross without also remembering Steven. What a legacy. Emerald's only real fumble comes with trying to fix what was never broken in the championship fight. For some confounding reason, Game Freak thought it would be cool to have Steven step down and Wallace take his place. This is a terrible change that robs the climactic showdown of the impact it had in spades in the previous entries. Wallace isn't introduced any earlier in Emerald, so this champion is someone we only just met in Sootopolis, whereas Steven had been guiding us throughout the entire adventure. Wallace makes for a fine gym leader, but he's just lacking the stage presence needed for a champion. Even more baffling is the decision to fill Wallace's gym vacancy with yet another water trainer, his former mentor Hoenn. Placing 2 major water battles back to back like this was never gonna work. Wallace comes off as an anticlimactic retread, despite minimal overlap with Hoenn's lineup, which he essentially inherited from Wallace's previous team. The new Sootopolis gym swaps Milotic out for Kingdra, a massive downgrade. Don't get me wrong, I love Kingdra, but let's face the facts. He is a legacy Pokemon that was already featured as the ace of a different game's 8th gym leader. Besides, Hoenn's Kingdra relies on Double Team and Rest, 2 ingredients that guarantee a miserable slog of a battle. What reason could Emerald possibly have for sabotaging both its final gym and the championship fight? It can't just be changed for change's sake. My best guess? This whole mess was made to facilitate another secret final boss fight, like in Gen 2's postgame. A valiant effort, but severely misguided. A well-designed, memorable main game boss, especially one as important as the last gym leader in the champion, is far more integral to get right than a secret Easter egg for a minority of players. I enjoyed Steven's Emerald appearance in Meteor Falls for sure, but it was never going to live up to Red's surprise reappearance on Mount Silver. The price of including this fight far outweighs any benefits it brings. This is the most unfortunate type of design mistake, an error of inclusion rather than one of omission. All the work that went into shuffling Steven, Wallace, and Hoenn around was ultimately wasted, serving only to weaken the experience. Unfortunately, the negativity streak will continue as we move into the story. Look, I never claimed Gen 3 was flawless. Amidst this criticism, I do want to make it clear that I don't consider storytelling to be a pivotal element when evaluating Pokemon games. I'm not a big fan of the Hoenn narrative, but that barely factors into my enjoyment. Anyway, behind the scenes, series creator Satoshi Tajiri transitioned into a more supporting role after directing each of the previous titles. Starting with Gen 3, the development lead was one Junichi Masuda. Masuda was no newcomer to Pokémon, he'd had his hands in the series since its inception. Nevertheless, new leadership came with a new directive for more serious storytelling with greater drama. In Generations 1 and 2, the player faced off with petty criminals and Team Rocket. These encounters did represent a break from the cozy slice-of-life narrative of these games, but were more akin to standing up to bullies than saving the world. Generation 3 moves past the Rocket arc and essentially reboots the series with a fresh pair of antagonistic teams, Teams Aqua and Magma. We aren't dealing with simple gangsters anymore, rather eco-terrorists determined to overthrow the planet's natural balance. In Pokemon Sapphire, Team Aqua aims to awaken the super ancient Pokemon Kyogre, to incite a torrential flood that will cover the world in an even greater ocean. Conversely, in Ruby, Team Magma attempts to use Groudon's powers to form new landmass for a growing population. The stakes couldn't be higher. If either one of these teams accomplished their goal, it would have world-ending consequences. This shift towards a more traditional JRPG plot, where the fate of the planet hangs in the balance, is directly at odds with the relaxed pace of the moment-to-moment adventure. The thematic clash comes to a head during the literal apocalypse that takes place neatly between the 7th and 8th gym. Squeezing a world-ending crisis into an otherwise casual romp through Hoenn comes across as half-hearted, but thankfully these events are easily ignored in place of the player's own self-insert role-playing. In my opinion, any Pokemon story should support the core fantasy, training and collecting cute and cool creatures. There's no need to be some sort of chosen one responsible for protecting the planet. In fact, I'd argue such a premise is a poor fit for the existing structure. I'm not opposed to trying something more adventurous than the classic rising through the ranks gym progression, but if Game Freak wants to go down that route, it needs to be intentionally and thoughtfully built into the gameplay from the ground up. They would also do well to remember that higher stakes are not inherently superior to more humble offerings. Hoenn shines brightest when it sticks to the timeless tale of a youngster, venturing out on their own to discover the wonders of a magical new world. The contrasting Aqua and Magma plots are essentially identical beyond minute cosmetic details. For example, in both games, you foil the corresponding team's plot at Mount Chimney. In Ruby, Magma boss Maxie strives to incite an eruption, while in Sapphire, Aqua's Archie seeks to cool the volcano. These version differences are downright lazy, often coming across as ham-fisted and nonsensical. Why is Team Magma's base hidden in a seaside cove off the coast of Lily Cove? Team Aqua hijacking the Slateport submarine to track down Kyogre's seafloor cavern makes sense. Not so when Magma does the exact same thing to awaken Groudon. Why is the embodiment of land slumbering at the bottom of the ocean? The numerous grunts of both teams feature very poor Pokemon variety. They share an over-reliance on the Zubat and Poochyena lines, with a slight divergence between the Numel and Carvanha families. Fighting through waves of these grunts is just as mind-numbing as the endless rocket fodder could be. Even Maxie and Archie blend together with essentially the same team. I also oppose the decision to make the box art legendaries exclusive to their respective games. As a reminder, Ho-Oh and Lugia were each given a starring role in Gold or Silver, but the other still remained available as an optional post-game encounter. The original motivation behind version exclusives doesn't really apply with Kyogre and Groudon. Trainers are very unlikely to trade away one of these super ancient legends, and they can't be bred, so this just strikes me as an underhanded incentive for players to double dip. These are highly desirable Pokemon, absolute heavyweights in-game, and banned in most competitive formats. Stat-wise, Kyogre and Groudon are mirrors of each other. Kyogre's massive 150 special attack, 140 special defense, is matched by Groudon on the physical side, each with an identically monstrous 670 base stat total. What truly elevates these Titans, though, are their signature abilities. Unlike Slaking, these abilities only push them to greater heights. Kyogre's Drizzle and Groudon's Drought automatically activate the Rain and Sun respectively, and, unlike normal weather, these effects never expire. Groudon gains a lot from the sun. It eliminates his water weakness and allows for surprise solar beams, but the ability is even better suited for setting up his team. Many Pokemon abilities provide strong buffs in favorable weather conditions. Groudon is indispensable on any dedicated Sun team. Just the simple act of setting up Sun, eliminating the need to sacrifice tempo using Sunny Day, is hugely impactful. Anything else Groudon can contribute is just extra credit. As powerful as Groudon is, Kyogre is on another level altogether. This was, bar none, the most dominant Pokemon in this era. Rain-focused teams matched or even surpassed Sun teams in their flexibility and overall viability. Once again, Kyogre just existing contributed massively to a tailored Rain team's success. The major differentiating factor is how easily Kyogre can abuse its own weather. Combining Rain's boost with the same type attack bonus more than doubles the power of Kyogre's water moves. When backed by a 150 base special attack, it's lights out. As if that's not enough, Kyogre has access to Calm Mind and perfectly accurate Thunders. As a physical-leaning pure ground type, Groudon completely misses out on anything even remotely similar with its fire-type coverage. No stab, and only a 90 base special attack. Plus, in a direct confrontation, the type matchup speaks for itself. Water does not lose to ground. In Ruby, Team Aqua assumes a supporting role as the more virtuous opposition for the evil Magma, and these roles are reversed in Sapphire version. Emerald, however, paints them both in an equally villainous light, making more of a point about the dangers of extremism. We take turns facing off with both Aqua and Magma. With more separation between their villainous plots, each takes on a more defined identity. The story is recognizable but told much more coherently. Ruby and Sapphire feel fragmented in comparison. A total narrative rework would be required to resolve my core issues, but this remixed plot is an improvement. I'm actually impressed with how much effort was put into elevating Emerald as the definitive Gen 3 experience. Yellow and Crystal were never this ambitious. Leaders Archie and Maxie both managed to awaken their mascots, and the resulting clash predictably spirals out of their control. The final member of the Superancient trio, Rayquaza, steals the spotlight this time around, as the peacemaker that breaks up the spat and restores balance. I love how distinct each member of this trio looks, yet they still mesh really well as a cohesive group. Groudon and Kyogre, both catchable in Emerald for a change, are positively iconic, some of the most strikingly designed creatures ever, and yet Rayquaza is even cooler still. With that serpentine Eastern Dragon look, Rayquaza is the definition of a legend. He owns that title and his place on Emerald's box art. I think Mewtwo's fascinating backstory gives him a bit of an edge still, but man, Rayquaza comes really close to overtaking the OG as my favorite legendary Pokemon. That said, this legend is too powerful to fit within the confines of his own game. Rayquaza destroys any semblance of balance in Emerald's Elite Four. In Ruby and Sapphire, Groudon and Kyogre could be caught at level 45, and would instantly become your team's MVP leading into the Elite Four. This somewhat undermines all the effort that went into training your own unique team, but at least Groudon and Kyogre still act as members of a team. In Emerald, Rayquaza is encountered at level 70 during the main campaign. His overwhelming power and ability to heal with rest necessitates the use of the Master Ball, but at the end of the day, he is catchable prior to rolling credits. When I say that Rayquaza absolutely annihilates the Elite Four, I hope you understand that I'm not exaggerating one bit. With no investment at all, he can practically solo all 5 fights back to back. Literally, the only thing holding him back is a quad weakness to Glacia's ice types. Don't get it twisted, he can still wipe the floor with her, he just might need a potion or two. I can appreciate the inclusion of a built-in assist mode to help struggling players overcome the game's final hurdle, but Rayquaza goes way beyond that. He trivializes the entire endgame unless the player deliberately chooses not to use him, requiring players to artificially handicap themselves if they want to preserve the challenge and satisfaction of beating the game is bafflingly poor design, but I still can't help loving the big guy. It's admittedly not a very original pick, but he's definitely my favorite addition Gen 3 makes to the Pokedex. Not only will I share my favorite Hoenn newcomer, I'll do you one better and share my second favorite, and third, and fourth, all the way down to my least favorite. There's no getting around the fact that Hoenn has its fair share of trash filler mons, but the good far outweighs the bad, such that narrowing your team down to a mere 6 is quite the difficult decision. I obviously can't go in depth on all 135, so a certain bug duo will be getting off easy today. I will, however, take some time to highlight other favorites that didn't make my team. Before doing so, a brief word on this cohort as a whole. On paper, the Gen 3 designs frequently have extremely creative inspirations, strong identities, and simply objective great design, but they somehow lack the magic that made the original 151 so timeless to me. I struggle with how best to express my thoughts in words. This is highly subjective, but those original designs just had some special sauce to them that has since diluted a bit as the Pokedex approaches 400 creatures. The Johto 100 admittedly never reached the same level of fame, but they still feel remarkably cohesive with the Kanto Pokemon, like a natural extension. Hoenn's additions are still unmistakably Pokemon, yet feel like a slightly different breed of creatures. The new Pokemon lean towards busier designs with more dynamic coloring and exaggerated features than what we've come to expect from the series. Such a shift isn't all that surprising. This is a team of artists growing more confident in their work, seizing the possibilities offered by more capable hardware. I want to make it crystal clear that such a change isn't necessarily negative. The two design philosophies are just different and will appeal to different players. My personal preference tends towards the simpler, naturalistic designs of the classic roster, where I can easily imagine the creatures actually roaming the wild, but you may disagree. I still admire the more ambitious Gen 3 designs that create something excitingly original by pulling from multiple inspirations. Cacturne combines a cactus with a scarecrow. The new roaming dragons also pulled traits from fighter jets. If Gen 1 included a lily pad Pokemon, it would likely be just that, whereas in Gen 3 we get some sort of Mexican pineapple duck thing. There is a discernible shift in the visual language of Pokemon appearances, however I don't want to act like the difference is black and white. I fully acknowledge that I'm glossing over a lot of nuance to make my point here. This is a subtle thing I've gradually noticed after immersing myself in this world for much of my life. A random person off the streets would never be able to sort Pokemon into their correct generation by sight alone. Even Pokemon fans are known to mistake Gen 2 Pokemon like Magcargo or Skarmory as Gen 3 additions. Conversely, the artists are still willing to draw from basic wildlife with wildly successful results, the likes of which would feel right at home in Gen 1. The Johto titles were framed as true sequels to the Kanto classics, and this extended to how its Pokemon were integrated with what came before. A large percentage of the newcomers were linked to the veterans, and they were provided no special treatment above the old guard. Gen 3 takes the opposite approach, acting as a soft reboot for the series. Fewer than 70 legacy Pokemon return, and those that do take a back seat, ceding the spotlight to the hot new Hoenn Pokemon. The shallower Gen 2 pool managed to fit 12 new evolutions to existing Pokemon, whereas Gen 3 completely abandons the idea. That is in spite of introducing two much less exciting baby forms, because why not? There are merits to both of these approaches, but overall I think Gen 3 was on the right track. My one caveat lies in the sudden trend of introducing new Pokemon with undeniable similarities to the classics they are supplanting. Swalot and Muck, Delcatty and Persian, Crawdot and Kingler, Milotic and Gyarados. Just look at Wurmple's entire family and purpose in the introductory forest. These are distinct Pokemon, and of course some degree of overlap is to be expected, but I hope we can agree there is a lot of copycat energy here. For better or worse, this is also where many of the series' traditions solidify. Tropes like regional Pikachu clones, and a pair of fossils to revive. Gen 2 admittedly also featured a regional mammal and bird in its early game, but I'd argue it's the third recurrence that creates such patterns. This may be why the differences in design language pop out so much to me. The dev team is practically begging me to compare the new and the old. In almost all these cases, the new blood struggles to escape the original's shadow. The exception is fan favorite Aggron. I truly regret not finding room for this absolute unit on my team. With his thick armor plating and battle-ready posture, you'd be forgiven for thinking him a pseudo-legendary, but Aron can actually be caught extremely early in Granite Cave. Upon evolving into Lairon and eventually Aggron, it's clear that this line is intended as a spiritual successor to Rhyhorn and Rhydon. Those two are among my all-time favorites, and Aggron actually manages to live up to their legacy. I've always had a soft spot for the Kaijumons like Nidoking and Tyranitar. Aggron feels right at home with this elite group. Pokemon like Tropius and Mawile are some of the coolest that Hoenn has to offer. Unfortunately, both are near unusable. This is a recurring problem in Gen 3. Great designs trapped within abysmal stat spreads. Tropius looks incredible, right? How about now? He's kind of bulky, I guess, but good luck running a defensive grass flying. Single-stage Pokemon need to either immediately impress with their power or fill a specialized role better than the competition. Tropius just brings nothing to the table. I'm a bit more forgiving of early encounters like Mawile, but even these should give you some reason to use them. Mawile's counterpart Sableye is far superior in that regard. With his unique Ghost Dark typing, Sableye possesses immunity to normal, fighting, and psychic, all without a single weakness. His stats are no better than Mawile's, but he has a unique niche, and that's all I ask for. Meanwhile, striking designs like Absol have the stats on paper, but are doomed never to live up to that theoretical potential. An attack stat of 130 is one of the highest on any non-legendary Pokemon, tied with the likes of Machamp, Ursaring, Rhydon, and Breloom. Unfortunately, those heavyweights have something Absol lacks: the physical moves required to harness that superior stat. Absol learns almost exclusively normie moves by level up, and the few dark-type attacks he does get rely on his mediocre special attack instead. Without usable dark stab moves, Absol's best offensive option is HM's Strength. Any normal type with stab would only need an attacking stat of around 85 to match Absol's Strength. So, an unevolved Doduo, for example. It's so frustrating when promising Pokemon are hampered for silly reasons like this. You'd think Game Freak would have grown beyond these types of mistakes. The disaster Pokemon indeed. The introduction of abilities opens an entirely new angle to Pokemon designs. Suddenly, two Pokemon with identical typing, stats, and even move pools could play completely differently thanks to a well-implemented passive ability. On the surface, Swellow and Pidgeot seem almost interchangeable, but Swellow sets itself apart through its ability Guts. Whenever Swellow is affected by a status condition, its moves do 1.5 times damage. Without an easy way to self-inflict status outside of a double battle, this might seem too situational to bother, but consider the damage possibilities when combined with the move Facade. This move also increases in power when afflicted by status, by double in fact. Oh, and Swellow also gets the stab bonus for being a normal type. Why not give it a choice band to hold as well? It's not like you need to use any other moves. After all these stacking multipliers, a modest 70 base power move grows into an effective 472 base power nuke. That's the power of a well-designed ability and strategic planning. Don't worry, Pidgeot got a little gift as well. Its ability Keen Eye protects against accuracy drops. Very cool, totally fair. All legacy Pokemon did receive abilities, but most were clearly afterthoughts. With few exceptions, generic abilities were merely slapped on to the Gen 1 and 2 Pokemon, with little regard to how they could be used to refine or differentiate. The only game changers that come to mind are Tyranitar's Sandstream, which is similar to Groudon and Kyogre's weather setting abilities, and Wobbuffet's terrifying ability to trap opponents with Shadow Tag. It's especially painful seeing the wasted potential on the legendaries. Each packs the profoundly boring Pressure ability. Game Freak has proven that they were willing to put in the work with some off-the-wall abilities that entire Pokemon revolve around. Kecleon draws from his chameleon basis with the ability Color Change, which matches his type to that of the move that last damaged him. When ability-driven design is taken to the extreme, you end up with Castform, whose whole identity is shaped by 3 weather transformations: Rainy Form, Sunny Form, and Snowy Form. I guess they forgot about the last weather condition, Sandstorm. Regardless, it's almost comical how elaborate this mechanic is for something so completely inconsequential to serious battling. Shedinja is a much more successful example of a gimmick Pokemon. This discarded husk will instantly faint if it takes even a single point of damage, but the signature ability Wonder Guard protects it against anything that doesn't hit super effectively. This might sound overpowered. Shedinja has the potential to be untouchable in favorable matchups, but it takes a very skilled trainer to dodge all 5 of his weaknesses, on top of any chip damage. Shedinja will never be solo-y in the Elite Four, but it's a perfect demonstration of what abilities can accomplish. We already have plenty of generic bugs, so kudos to Game Freak for their confidence in crafting such an unconventional Pokemon. If you've watched my Gen 2 retrospective, you'll recall the high praise I gave towards the Pokedex side quest. Hunting down every species was so satisfying that I was intrinsically motivated, or rather compelled, to fully complete the challenge. Even after conquering both Johto and Kanto, I couldn't put the game down. The Hoenn games seem poised to match that completionist compulsion, and yet you wouldn't catch me dead trying to fill out this Pokedex. What went wrong? Game Freak had good intentions, I'll give them that. With a whopping 386 creatures now in existence, they wisely opted to partition about half into a smaller regional dex. This slice of the greater national dex reduces that total to a lean 202 Pokemon, 135 newcomers, and 67 veterans. In doing so, the Hoenn Pokemon are given the full spotlight, while still making room for a few familiar faces. These Pokemon are all thoughtfully distributed throughout the game. Everyone has a logical habitat that fits their biology. It all fits together so naturally that it's hard to tell whether the chicken or the egg came first. Was Cacnea created to populate the desert, or was the desert added to house Cacnea? This level of immersion remains strong, but the absence of time-dependent encounters is one of the only regressions the GBA titles suffer. Outside the deepened berry system, real-time clock elements as a whole are underutilized. It's a real shame. I really enjoyed completing my daily chores, and the way Pokemon like Lapras were hidden behind very specific conditions was a genius method to make the Pokedex hunt more varied and exciting. Thankfully, there remains plenty of potential for secret special encounters. We already covered Feebas, but for a less infamous example, let's look at Chimecho. This Pokemon is also ridiculously elusive, with only a 2% encounter chance in one single patch of grass on Mount Pyre's summit. The major difference between Feebas and Chimecho is that the latter is not used in a single trainer's team throughout the entire adventure, at least in Ruby and Sapphire. Why does this matter? Because Chimecho's Pokedex entry remains blank until players find one themselves, they have to do so without any location hints whatsoever. There's evidence in the internal database that Chimecho was originally planned as a mythical, somewhat explaining this peculiar treatment. As it stands, the Pokemon is more of a trophy than anything you'd want to train, which I'm surprisingly okay with as a one-off. While on the topic of mythicals, I do have to commend the fact that many were fully integrated into the game world. Rather than just getting handed the Pokemon unceremoniously, actual in-game events were distributed, bringing with them a unique location that expands the scope of your adventure. Unsurprisingly, these events have been lost to time, but I imagine they were absolutely mind-blowing to players in the mid-2000s. Back to the Pokedex problem at hand. The regional dex may satisfy its purpose of paying the newcomers the attention they deserve, but it utterly fails to satisfy the completionist within me. Quite simply, a count of 202 is underwhelming when compared to the previous game's 251. Furthermore, there is no sense of closure or accomplishment in a completed Hoenn dex, when saddled with the knowledge that almost as many Pokemon remain uncaught. The leftover 184 are fully programmed into the game, so you might think completing the national dex is the answer we're looking for. I advise against such an endeavor. Communication with Gen 1 or 2 cartridges is apparently impossible, so your Pokedex quest starts from zero. Cue admittedly excellent remakes of the Kanto titles to once again offer up the original 151 for capture. This all seems like a suspiciously convenient means of drumming up sales for Fire Red and Leaf Green, but I'm not nearly tech savvy enough to know for sure. With the Hoenn and Kanto roster fully covered, where does that leave Johto? This is where I feel the Pokemon Company crosses a line. The Johto Pokemon are unreasonably difficult to capture in these mainline games, to the point where I feel justified calling Game Freak out for exploiting their younger player base, not to mention parents' wallets. Let me illustrate just how inaccessible these 100 creatures are. First, the easy ones. 20% of the Johto Pokemon are readily available during the main adventure in Ruby and Sapphire. That's a solid start. Players with a refined taste can still train greats like Donphan or Lantern as they journey through Hoenn. Fire Red and Leaf Green offer up another chunk, 29 version-agnostic catches, and 7 additional exclusives for each. If I have one criticism for the Kanto remakes, it's their stubborn insistence on absolute authenticity to the Gen 1 experience. As it relates to our discussion, every single Johto Pokemon is relegated to a half-baked epilogue on the Sevi Islands. I'm sorry, but Pokemon like Sentret or Hoppip do not belong in the postgame. What purpose can they possibly serve there, other than simply checking off a box? The eventual release of Pokemon Emerald follows suit, with the remaining stragglers all contained to a post-game expanded Safari Zone. Imagine being a young fan in the summer of 2003, bidding farewell to your beloved Gen 2 team, excited to dive into the brand new world of Hoenn. You methodically capture every Pokemon you encounter, determined to reassemble your childhood favorites, but before long, your progress hits a brick wall. Fast forward a year and a half to Christmas 2004 as you unwrap Pokemon Fire Red version. It's disappointing that Quagsire can't join in on the journey through Kanto as it did in Johto, but at least you're finally reunited with your old pal. If you're lucky, your neighbor might have gotten Leaf Green version. There's no way your parents could afford both of the remakes, so hopefully he's willing to trade over those that you're missing, like Sneasel and Misdreavus. A mere 4 months later, however, and you're already begging mom and dad for yet another Pokemon game, because this one has Mareep in it, and Aipom, and Gligar, the best Pokemon of all. You see how dastardly this is? Your childhood team was taken from you and is now being drip-fed back over the course of years and multiple purchases. Each new game is effectively holding a Johto subsect hostage, dangling a favorite or two out of reach such that each player will be desperate to expand their collection. You'll notice I skipped right over the starters and legendaries. What's the deal with those? Oh, it gets so much worse. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune are also catchable in Fire Red and Leaf Green, but only in the postgame, and only one per save file. An unintentional bug that causes the legendary beast to disappear forever if they use Roar is the straw that breaks the camel's back. As legendaries, they cannot breed, so good luck convincing a friend to trade you theirs after how hard they worked to catch it. At the end of the day, purchasing and playing Fire Red and Leaf Green both to completion is still not enough to get all three beasts. Meanwhile, the Tower duo, Ho-Oh and Lugia, joined Celebi as event-only Pokemon, completely inaccessible in the mainline games to the vast majority of players. Last but not least, Professor Birch rewards you with your choice of a single Johto starter in Pokemon Emerald, after completing the entire Hoenn Pokedex. These prerequisites are the steepest the series has seen, but there is a silver lining in that they are breedable and therefore more easily tradable. A small circle of dedicated Pokefans could feasibly share the full set with each other. If completing the National Dex sounds absurdly difficult, that's because it is. Absurdly expensive too. But don't worry, Nintendo has a solution for you. Just buy the GameCube spin-offs. The Johto starters, legendary beasts, and cover legendaries are all easily accessible. Simply pony up the cash for not one, but two Grindfests, as well as the necessary hardware. Compare this mess to the previous Pokedexes. Gen 1 predated the breeding mechanic, so certain Pokemon were difficult to share, but all Pokemon were catchable between the two base games. In Gen 2, the vast majority were available in the base cartridges alone, and the remainder can easily be transferred up from the previous games. Gen 3, on the other hand, requires no fewer than 5 separate games to complete, and does everything in its power to sell you both Colosseum and Gale of Darkness to make the process less miserable. It's no wonder the "gotta catch 'em all" slogan was quietly phased out during this era. The classic Pokemon dream was simply no longer attainable for the average player. If the Pokedex has you feeling a bit disillusioned, maybe some of the other postgame options are more your speed. Gen 3 fans already know where this is headed, and we'll get there. But let's work our way up, starting with the smaller inclusions. For one, Pokemon Emerald added the ability to rematch the 8 gym leaders in the doubles format. It's admittedly a very minor touch, but a thoughtful one that serves as a nice little treat for the fans. Receiving an unexpected call from one of the 8 leaders is a delightful surprise, and it's always fascinating to see how their teams evolve over time. I loved seeing early gym leaders like Roxanne redeemed with more creative team compositions, even if they're too underleveled to be much of a challenge. This feature is easy to ignore because it doesn't meaningfully extend playtime, nor does it offer any sort of incentive. Regardless, I think it's a great idea. The effect is subtle but does help to breathe life into the characters and world of Hoenn. And now for something completely different. Pokemon contests were an earnest attempt to create a true alternative to battling. Even if it didn't quite pan out, I have to applaud such a bold experiment. Each of your Pokemon can be trained in 5 categories: coolness, beauty, cuteness, cleverness, and toughness. During the introductory presentation, Pokemon score points based on how many of the corresponding Pokeblocks they've been fed. This part is quite one-dimensional. The subsequent evaluation round is where the meat of the strategy is. You see, every single attack in the game has 2 descriptions. One for the primary battling effect, and then an entirely different utility tailored to contests. The contest categories are analogous to attack types, but you won't get far into the contest ranks by merely matching your moves to the contest category. The simplest contest moves simply appeal to the judges, just as the simplest battle moves simply deal damage. However, contest moves have a wide range of possible utility beyond earning points in the current round. You can manipulate turn order to guarantee applause bonuses in future rounds, scare opponents that performed before you, incite nerves in those who have yet to perform, set up multi-turn combo moves, etc., etc. Regardless of your feelings towards all this, it's impressive how much effort was put into this side mode. Around this time, there was a big push towards expanding Pokemon's role in the world beyond just fighting combatants, as evidenced by the birth of multi-game spin-off series like Pokemon Ranger and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. In that context, it's pretty cool that we essentially got a mini spin-off tucked inside the Gen 3 mainline games for free. I never personally found much enjoyment in the contest format, but unintrusive bonus content is certainly not something to complain about. Alright, I can't stall any longer. It's time for the Battle Frontier. This meaty post-game gauntlet is such a generous offering that I don't even know where to begin. In Pokemon Emerald, a new character named Scott scouts the Hoenn region for talent, and of course he's eager to invite the new champion to his private island. Here, the strongest trainers gather for friendly competition in 7 battle facilities, each with their own unique rules and challenges. And yes, you guessed it, we're gonna be discussing each individually. I would promise to keep it short, but let's face it, we're way past the point of brevity. The Battle Tower returns from Crystal version and is the baseline facility from Ruby and Sapphire that the 6 Emerald editions spin off from. This is just pure battling bliss with no gimmicks. The newly polished combat of Gen 3 breathes new life into even the classic no-frills battles we've been playing for years. Matches follow a competitive rule set, standardized levels, no duplicates, and no potions or revives. There's even a proper ban list, so a certain Scourge of the Sky that carried you through the Elite Four is gonna have to sit this one out. It is critical that your team be as optimized as possible though, because your opponent's teams sure will be. Gen 3 greatly increases the number of variables that differentiate Pokemon of the same species, and thereby expands the impact specialization can have in a Pokemon's power. 2 Breilooms will differ in their innate stats from the moment they're caught. This is due to the presence of hidden individual values, or IVs, ranging from 0 to 31 that are assigned to each stat at inception. Each Pokemon also possesses one of 25 natures, as displayed on their summary page. This isn't just flavor text. Each nature will boost a stat by 10% and decrease a stat by 10%. Players ordinarily don't have control over these variables, but at the same time, no one bats an eyelash at casual eugenics in the world of Pokemon. The effort value, or EV system, was also overhauled in Gen 3. Essentially, the Pokemon you train against affect the stat gains you'll see upon leveling up. If I trained my Swampert against Whismur in Rust Earth Tunnel, it would gradually grow bulkier than one that trained against Shuppet on Mount Pyre. In exchange, the latter would learn to hit harder with a higher attacking stat. With all the compounded effects of IV, EV, and nature inequality, it's really surprising how wide the stat ranges for a single species can be. It's usually best to lean into your Pokemon's natural strengths rather than trying to patch their weaknesses, but the choice is ultimately yours. Swampert is naturally bulky and hard-hitting, so I trained mine accordingly. You, however, may opt to create the surprise Speedpert. With max investment, it's literally twice as fast as the run-of-the-mill Slowpert. I wish a better attempt was made to explain these mechanics in-game. Heck, I wish any attempt was made to explain these mechanics in-game. Still, the added complexity in team building is a huge win in spite of the opacity. Perfecting your team is a real time sink, but I find the act of min-maxing to my exact specification to be super satisfying. Of course, all this depth also plays directly into multiplayer matches. Gen 3 is where the Pokemon series started treating PvP as more than an afterthought. In fact, a healthy competitive scene still thrives on battle simulators like Pokemon Showdown all these years later. Speaking of multiplayer, the Battle Tower also allows two friends to team up in co-op double battles against AI teams. How cool is that? I'm not going to dwell on the Battle Arena and Palace, because these are the weakest links, and hey, I'm trying to convince you how amazing the Battle Frontier is after all. Both of these deviate from the standard battle format by means of subtraction. The Battle Arena forces 1v1 evaluations. One of your Pokemon faces off against one of the opponents, and there is no switching out until a victor is decided. To prevent stalemates, the two combatants are evaluated after the third round, and rewarded for mindless offense. Points are awarded based on how many offensive attacks were used, the accuracy of those attacks, and how much damage they were able to inflict. This arbitrary criteria actively discourages more thoughtful play such as status or setup strategies, and the inability to swap active Pokemon dumbs the game down tremendously. The best strategy, if you can call it that, is to cross your fingers for favorable matchups and then just spam your best attacking moves. The Battle Palace is worse still. You may be free to switch out, but you now have no control over which moves your Pokemon use. Pokemon select their attacks randomly with an offensive, defensive, or supportive leaning based on their nature. The best case scenario is an excruciatingly boring battle, with the alternative being blood-boiling frustration as you sit on the sidelines watching your team throw the fight. I have no idea how this made it past the drawing board. However, despite my negativity, this is still bonus content that you're free to ignore. So how bad is it really? It's fair to say these two facilities missed the mark, but the remaining four make up for it with smart twists that elevate them above the baseline set by the tower. Working our way up my rankings, we arrive at the Battle Pike. What is a pike anyway? I haven't the foggiest, but the Seviper-themed architecture is very eye-catching. Inside the belly of the beast, participants are presented with a choice of 3 rooms to enter. Each room could house a standard battle, but that is just one possibility. It could also contain a wild Pokemon gauntlet, status affliction, or even a friendly trainer to heal your team. Oh yeah, you don't have the luxury of a fresh start to each battle, meaning these moments of mercy really matter. An NPC in the lobby provides vague hints of what lies behind one of the 3 doors, which resolves that fork into a 50-50 between 2 possibilities. Obviously, luck is a major factor in the Pike, but that doesn't mean strategy and measured risk-taking don't also pay off. The inherent suspense when selecting a door creates a unique mood and helps the random outcomes feel less unfair. The Pike is arguably the easiest facility in the Frontier, but that doesn't diminish its appeal to me. On the other side of the spectrum lies what is likely the most difficult, the Battle Pyramid. Players are dropped into a randomly generated 7-floor maze with only one goal: escape. There's a hint of some primitive roguelike DNA here, with each run acting as its own little adventure. You'll find other trainers in the maze, of course, but also wild Pokemon and even items. That's right, no free heals yet again. It's up to you to manage your own potions, revives, and ethers. An NPC hints at the type of Pokemon you'll be fending off, so you can enter the pyramid prepared for the challenges within. Even with knowledge of which seed you'll be facing, these wild encounters are what led to my demise most often. They're too fast to reliably escape from, and they're scarily effective at wearing me down over time. Each floor of the pyramid begins in near total darkness. Players are incentivized to partake in battles to gradually illuminate the area. Even after pinpointing the exit, it can be prudent to continue exploring to stock up on valuable items. Your inventory actually carries over into subsequent runs. As the Frontier's biggest departure from standard battling, the pyramid can test the player in completely different ways. Endurance and resource management are the name of the game here. Moving on to something more recognizable but no less captivating, we have the Battle Dome. Trainers each bring a mini party of 3 Pokemon to compete in a 16-entrant tournament. What separates the Battle Dome from the standard Battle Tower is the transparency provided for upcoming opponents. Before each match, you are given the opportunity to freely study their trainer card, learn their strategies, and most importantly, reveal the 3 Pokemon lineups you'll be facing. You are then given the choice of which 2 of your Pokemon have the best shot at beating the opponent's team, while being blind to their 2 selections. This creates refreshingly fast-paced battles, not to mention some really interesting decision-making and mind games against the NPCs. Battle Girl Joanna packs a Chansey, Poliwrath, and Cacturne. My best bet against the Cacturne is Torkoal, but then I have to worry about the Poliwrath. Will she even bring the Cacturne, or does she know that just the threat is enough to keep Swampert trembling on the bench? Obviously the game isn't really simulating full CPU battles off screen, but the bracket presentation goes a long way towards selling the illusion and raising the perceived stakes of each match. No matter how much I cross my fingers, the biggest threat to my squad always seems to meet me in the grand finals. Fundamentally, the only innovation the Dome makes is in the team previews, but this is a fantastic twist for sure, and all the superficial theatrics deserve their flowers too. I've saved the best for last, introducing the Battle Factory. Here, you are tasked with defeating 7 trainers in a series of 3v3 battles, just like the Battle Tower. So, what's the catch? You compete with a team of rental Pokemon, not your own meticulously assembled lineup. This idea is so simple on the surface, but genius in practice. The factory is immediately approachable. There's no need to spend dozens of hours honing the perfect Pokemon, they're already trained for you. All the depth of team building is boiled down to a series of rapid decisions. Every run opens with a draft phase, and then you have the option to swap a Pokemon with each defeated trainer. Because you'll be crafting a unique team with each run, the variety feels endless. As a kid, I probably spent more time here than all the other facilities combined, and it never got old. I love the exposure even lesser used Pokemon receive in the factory. This is possibly the only time players will see uncommon back sprites, and who knows, maybe find reason to reevaluate Pokemon they had previously written off. Even more so than the Battle Pyramid, there's a roguelike appeal to making the best of the hand you're dealt. You aren't always going to have an Alakazam or Gardevoir. Sometimes you have to resort to the likes of Grumpig. The constant novelty scratches the same dopamine itch as modern gacha games, where you never know what you're gonna get. Let's just take a moment to appreciate a time before predatory monetization proliferated in games. The factory is just one of many side modes on top of an already full-featured adventure. Victory in each facility comes with prizes in the form of battle points, a valuable currency that can be exchanged for powerful hold items or new moves, Chuck E. Cheese style. That's cool and all, but the real draw is a second set of badges, or rather symbols. Repeated W's eventually catch the attention of the Frontier Brains, 7 Pokemon Masters who act as post-game analogs to the gym leaders. These battles will push you to your absolute limit. The difficulty spike from the campaign is enormous. Gen 2 purported to offer a second quest with its return to Kanto. Emerald belatedly delivers on that promise with a rewarding new challenge that actually, well, challenges seasoned players. In an era predating online multiplayer, Pokemon Emerald's postgame is the closest you can reasonably get to that limitless supply of competitive motivation. I adore a game that keeps providing players new goals to work towards, never letting them rest on their laurels even long after the credits have rolled. My original Emerald save file is long gone, but I recall my playtime stretching well into the 700-hour range, much of which was spent competing in these battle facilities. Previous Pokemon games technically allowed for that level of engagement as well, but it was entirely player-driven in a hollow sense. A youngster with infinite free time is happy to grind an army of level 100s for no other reason than bragging rights at recess. Pokemon Emerald preserves that intrinsic motivation, while also layering on real extrinsic incentives to keep playing forever. My gaming time is more precious as an adult, so I will nitpick that the Frontier leans too heavily on win streaks, where a single loss can undo hours of progress. Thankfully, modern emulation features allowed me to lock in my wins and experience some Frontier brain battles I never reached as a kid. I don't love the idea of cheating with save states, but I like the idea of wasting my limited free time even less. Even ignoring the terrifying possibility of losing your win streak, the prerequisites for the gold level Frontier Brain rematches are excessive. 3 successful runs in the Battle Pyramid earn you a fight against Brandon's team of Reggies. That's a fair and reasonable challenge. To have a shot at his gold symbol, you'd be required to complete 10 pyramid runs in a row, or 70 consecutive floors without a single failure. Realistically, this is an impossible feat for all but a minute fraction of the Pokemon roster, and anyone who doesn't dedicate their entire life to this game. Nevertheless, I appreciate the philosophy of always providing a greater achievement to strive for. Although the Frontier Brains are exclusive to the single battle format, most facilities even offer a supplementary double battle mode, as if the package wasn't generous enough already. The Hoenn games had already secured their spot in the upper echelons of the series, past and present. And then Emerald confidently entered the ring, definitively propelling Gen 3 into the stratosphere with its outstanding postgame. As we begin to wind down, I'd like to return to my opening statements, that Gen 3 represents the franchise at its very best. Although I hope my praise outweighed my criticism, you may be surprised that this video wasn't entirely a glowing puff piece. It's true that we're most critical of the things we love, but even still it was never my intent to portray the Hoenn games as perfect. They are staggeringly ambitious and succeed on most counts, but are not without a few missteps. However, in light of the wealth of content on offer on top of the game's artistic and mechanical achievements, it feels silly to belabor quibbles about the plot, pacing, or Pokedex availability. It's important to acknowledge these issues, but they quickly fade into the background when you consider all that these games do right. The world is incredibly well designed and a joy to inhabit. The Pokémon themselves look better than ever. Polished sprites with strong posing breathe new life into the creatures. Bonus points to Emerald for bringing back the simple but effective entrance animations. Gen 3 introduced us to many all-timers, Pokémon that remain beloved by the fanbase all these years later. I cherish my childhood memories exploring Hoenn alongside my Pocket Monster pals, and was pleasantly surprised at how easily I could recapture that magic revisiting Gen 3 today. When returning to Kanto and Johto for previous retrospectives, I did have to push through a bit of antiquated design to uncover the fun, but Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald hold up wonderfully. This generation made so many quality of life fixes that bring the series into the modern age. The new PC graphical interface alone is indispensable. It's easier than ever to fully immerse yourself into the classic Pokémon adventure. This vibrant, sharp pixel art is my favorite visual style of the series, and I desperately wish Game Freak would consider returning to the timeless simplicity of these earlier games. For all these reasons and more, the third generation was a massive leap forward, and marked a true turning point in Pokemon's history. Ruby, Sapphire, and especially Emerald kick-started a legendary golden age for the series, and I count myself fortunate to have experienced it firsthand back in the day. Alright, that's enough from me, now it's your turn. For this to be a fair exchange, I'll be expecting 10,000 words minimum, double-spaced, MLA formatted on my desk by next Tuesday. I joke, but I do truly look forward to hearing your thoughts on Hoenn, its Pokémon, and your memories of these games. Don't leave me hanging here. Generation 3 had all the necessary ingredients to stand the test of time, but, spoiler alert, there was a Generation 4 that continued to refine the formula. I hope you'll stick around as I continue this retrospective series with Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed your time here. If so, please don't forget to subscribe for more. Alongside future Pokémon videos, I also plan to continue my ongoing Legend of Zelda retrospective series and surprise you with more of yesterday's favorites. Special thanks to Axel Dieker and Andreas Schouten for their generous support on Patreon. As you'd imagine, these videos require enormous effort. I don't know where I'd find the motivation without loyal fans who believe in my vision for this channel. And with that, it's about time I bid you adieu. Until next time, take care.